Welcome to Weekly Pulse. I'm Ralphie Aversa. This week we continue to cover the intersection of sports and politics. We talked to retired NFL player Ben Watson about social injustice and how we can expect the league to support the Black Lives Matter movement when football returns this fall. Then we'll switch gears and talk baseball. What has to happen for us to see pitchers take the mound in 2020? But first, we focus on basketball. The NBA is known as one of the most socially conscious sports leagues in America. We've heard some players express their support for the Black Lives Matter movement on social media, and we've seen some of them take to the streets and protest. But what about when the season begins? How will the teams and the league as a whole address what's happening in the U.S.? We talked to former NBPA Executive Director Charles Grantham, and we started out by asking what the NBA can do to ensure that we see real change happen.
That's really going to be a matter of communications between the league and the players, and also to get an understanding from the league as to what kinds of concrete steps that they may take regarding the demonstrations. Because it's one thing in theory to use our platform, it's another to promise financial assistance, but yet another to talk about concrete ways in which you're going to make change happen. And I think at some point here, all the leagues, and particularly basketball, because I think of the relationship they have with their players, they're going to have to start to consider outside partnerships with someone like the NAACP or something along those lines to demonstrate to the players that this is not just a give at the office thing. It's going to be structured, and we're looking at ways to get legislation, and changing of attitudes is one thing, but legislation really changes behavior. And the players are excellent agents of change to ensure that some of those things happen. And this is sort of the beginning. Mm-hmm. So a discussion like that will to be able to assure the players that this is only the beginning, and that we as an institution are looking to help make some of those changes happen. They're ready to make a contribution. It's pretty clear. And I think the discussion between Adam Silver and the union would have to talk about ways in which that's a demonstration, an act of a demonstration, or demonstrating an act toward change and making some of these changes actually happen. It's one thing to protest, but the seriousness of the racial tension and the change that, look, I attended the March on Washington in 1963. This is 2020. So the incremental change, the idea of change, radical change, we have not seen. And our government and the way we're structured is set for incremental change. And so the question here is, what are we prepared to do as the institution of basketball? How can we make some of these changes happen through legislation? And the NAACP, if I go back to the Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, they have always set in motion that this is the institution of change that can be utilized at this point. So again, I think it's a conversation to ease the tension, to ease the feeling of some of these players, to get them to understand that an action is going to be taken here. We have the kind of relationship in professional basketball to make that happen. And I think they have to be assured of that. I would not be surprised if, in fact, there will continue in some form to continue that demonstration. I would not be surprised at all. And again, it goes back to, at this point, what is the act? We've demonstrated, we've marched. How do we translate this platform that we have? How do we translate this into action? And I believe the timing is right for that.
You're watching Weekly Pulse. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Weekly Pulse.
Well, 3 major league executives told me that if the two sides cannot reach an agreement by next week, Commissioner Rob Manfred will simply implement a short season, perhaps as short as 48 games or 50 games. He has the power to do that from the March 26th agreement. The Major League Baseball Players Association submitted an 89-game schedule at full prorated play on Tuesday night. Major League Baseball is expected to swiftly dismiss it, saying we still need you to have a reduction of your prorated salary. The big thing is there's simply not enough time for 89 games, MLB says. They want the season to end by September 27th, the regular season, and then postseason. And the postseason could have 8 teams from each league, culminating in a World Series. But baseball insists it must end for fear of the second wave of the pandemic. And besides, Fox TV, which broadcasts the World Series, would also like the games to end in October because of the NFL season, the political race, obviously the presidential election on November 3rd, as well as other sports playing at the same time, even including the Masters. So the two sides are making a little bit ground, but not enough. Perhaps with a deadline, perhaps with Rob Manfred saying, you have to get this done or I'm stepping in, and nobody will like that deal. So, as one baseball executive told me, it would be ugly, real ugly. So the race is on right now to finally get an agreement. They should reach an agreement by end of next week. If not, expect Rob Manfred to step in and start the season having play probably beginning around mid-July.
Charles Grantham not only has years of experience with the MBPA, but he's also the current director of the sports business program at Seton Hall. So we asked for his take on the current state of negotiations between the MLB and its players.
They have already agreed to take a prorated salary. You would think that that would be the most important thing here. We all know that there is subsequent negotiations that will have to be had between management and labor over the potential losses because of the fact that 40% or so of the revenue they earn this year comes from attendance and parking concessions and other sponsorships. But the idea that players have already agreed to taking a prorated salary based on the number of games that will be played, that seems to be the most important part of the negotiation. And therefore the other things should come along within these next couple of weeks, I would assume. This is an important time for all sports. However, we must go back and remember that the strike in 1994, they didn't play the World Series. And over time, people eventually came back to baseball. I see this as no different, that even if they did not play, they would lose some of that space. But over time, and people own teams for 25, 30 years, and over time, they're able to recoup these losses. And I think part of the contention with the players is that they expect the players to take an immediate loss, and they have an opportunity to spread their losses out over time with their partners. So yes, it's an important time for them, but I could also see that they feel that if they don't play this year, that they will eventually get the fans' attention and fans back. But make no mistake about it, this is a uniquely different time of uncertainty. And so therefore, certain things have to be done together, that both players and owners will sit down and say, do we trust each other to get through this season? We'll fight and leave those other issues on the table to the next negotiation. At some point, I think they'll arrive at that point. There's an enormous risk. There's enormous risk that the players take by playing. This isn't the typical season. This is a time where pre-existing conditions will put you in a category to make you highly vulnerable for this disease. And at a time when we have to be, again, careful that the rise of cases is starting to spread again, and certainly in some of the key cities by which we're playing Major League Baseball. So it's a very trying time, and I can understand how there's some anxiety among the players because it is an extra burden. One, it's to negotiate our salary, but two, how do we quantify the risk that we're also taking?
Don't go anywhere. Weekly Pulse will be right back. We're back on Weekly Pulse.
Ben Watson had an incredible career as an NFL tight end, playing with some of the best quarterbacks in the league today. But since his retirement, he's devoted himself to raising awareness about social injustices. We caught up with Watson to get his take on the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, how the NFL has responded, and what he thinks players will do to carry that message into the fall. There is a lot to discuss right now happening within the NFL and happening within the world. One of the things that comes to mind initially with what's been happening as far as the NFL and the protests that are underway over police brutality and racism and the death of George Floyd is a compilation video that was put together by a number of stars in the NFL, really headlined by the face of the league, reigning Super Bowl MVP Patrick Mahomes. Ben, let's start there. For you, I guess, what does it mean to see the face of the NFL put his name and face and likeness to this movement and say, yes, Black Lives Matter?
Well, first of all, it's just encouraging as a retired player now to look at the guys who are younger, who are really taking the reins with this. And so for them collectively, Patrick included, to speak out, to let their faces be seen and their voices be heard is very powerful. And you see how the league has responded.
Players have spoken out about this before. Obviously, it's probably not a coincidence that a day after that video that I mentioned featuring Patrick Mahomes and other players, the commissioner as well released a video in which he admitted that the NFL should have listened to its players a few years ago when these protests began. What did you think when you saw that video from Commissioner Goodell?
I think I was surprised as much as everybody else was. The commissioner, who works for the owners, who is the face of the league, is responding to the outcry of players, and he had to. But I was happy to see him respond, and then obviously to see what the next steps are.
But something you said there was key, because at the end of the day, Commissioner Goodell, he works for the owners. So how do they move forward now with this movement if, in fact, the commissioner is sincere?
I think he's in a position of a balance, obviously, and again, whether it's backed into because of pressure, which a lot of change happens because of pressure. A lot of times people's hearts aren't really in it. Sometimes that changes over the course, sometimes it doesn't. But the effect that happens is one that is a desired effect for the majority of the society, and when it comes to simply doing what is right. So how do they do it? How does he do it? How do owners get involved? Ownership realizing that players care about these issues and they're not simply trying to be a part of a wave. These are things that directly have affected our lives, our families' lives, and the lives of our teammates. So I think that's vitally important. If you listen to those that you say you care about, you can't help but get involved in the issues that are important to them.
Super Bowl champion, retired NFL tight end Ben Watson joining us here on USA Today Sports. I'm Ralphie Aversa. You mentioned, of course, being with the Saints, your former teammate Drew Brees, his comments to Yahoo Finance about the flag, and then, of course, his apology and his direct message to President Trump. President Trump getting involved again. And Ben, the fact of the matter is, whether we like it or not, it is an election year. Just going real quick back to your former teammate, Drew, have you had a chance to speak with him at all since all of this happened or no?
I have. And, I'm pretty sure, I know he's spoken with a lot of teammates, former teammates, friends that aren't teammates. I love Drew. I love his family. He's one of my favorite teammates, honestly, just because of who he is and just where our families were. We were both the two old guys in the locker room, for several years and connected on that level. So I have spoken with him. I spoke to him after he said what he said. And the thing is, we've known since 2016, all of us, where he stood on the anthem. where he stood on people taking a knee during the anthem. That wasn't new to me. And he said it in his apology. I don't want to go back through that. He's apologized. Everybody, I know, has forgiven him. Look, people say things, whether they mean it or not, it's all about how you said it. And I think he said it best. There are some things I wouldn't have said the way that it was taken. Especially with the context and the atmosphere that we're in now. The way he said what he said, I think he would have definitely taken back. And you see someone who is, look, I've talked about many of these things before, but maybe I'm not hearing it as much as I need to. And so I think that's a great place for him to be. That's a great place for us all to be, considering our own convictions about things. There's nothing wrong with having certain convictions. What is wrong is when you don't have the empathy to possibly see someone else's side. Whether you agree with it or not, I believe that we need to respect each other's positions, whatever they are. As far as Drew goes, I think he was actually responding to a direct tweet from the president regarding him and his apology. And so I think that's why you saw Drew directly respond, which I believe 100% that was the correct thing for him to do. But I'm going to tell you something about football. Football is one of those sports where you have a group of men who are together for a common goal, and they thrive off of the good ones. Teams, organizations thrive off of any sort of adversity. If anything, I think with the men in that locker room in particular, it's going to make them grow closer together. There's going to be conversations that hadn't been had before. There's going to be hugs that hadn't been had before. So I think that for many teams, not just New Orleans, but specifically them, is going to have a positive effect. I can say in speaking with teammates around other places where everybody's talking about this. And so, again, this is a moment I would say the collective support we've seen from individual clubs and their players, especially while many of them are distancing, haven't seen each other in person in a long time, makes this part of the movement that started, way back when in 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, really, if we want to be honest about where this movement started. I think that there is a new opportunity for players specifically, but really the population in general, to really get involved and understand what needs to be done.
You did an interview with a station in Boston, WBZ, and this was a quote that, obviously got a lot of headlines. You said, quote, "I've had plenty of racist teammates." And then you went on to further kind of explain exactly what you meant. I think when people first read that or they only read the headline, they're taken a bit back and they think, are there overt racists, throughout these NFL locker rooms? It's more of micro. I haven't been in an NFL locker room. You have. Is it more of a microaggression thing? Or I guess for someone who didn't see your explanation, what exactly did you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that we have to understand that racism has multiple facets. A lot of times we think of racism as only, does someone call you the N-word? Are they part of the KKK? Do they attest to an ideology or subscribe to an ideology of racial hierarchy and development? Yes, all those things are racist. But our culture in and of itself promotes these things many times without us even really realizing it. When I made that comment, yeah, of course, I have been. I've been in the locker room with some guys who we all knew that guy is racist by some of the things that he said. But we also have been in locker rooms with people who would never say those things out loud, but that's how they feel internally. We always address the root problem, but we always have to address its symptom as well. And that's what I believe we're trying to do. So yes, I've been in the locker room with racist guys. I've been in the locker room with sexist guys and all the above. I think if we look in any of our workplaces, we could all kind of say the same thing. So then the next step is to take personal inventory and be introspective. Where do I fall in? What are my blind spots? What are some things that I've thought? What are some things that I've allowed to happen through my silence because I didn't feel like it was that big a deal? That's when it gets real. That's when we really start to make a dent in this thing. America is looking in the mirror. And I think that the mirror is the myriads of protesters who aren't protesting for no reason, simply because they want to get some fresh air. There's a reason why they're outside. There's a reason why they felt the need to express themselves in that way. A fool looks in the mirror and walks away unchanged. And right now, America can't be foolish.
Ben, you're in Boston, right? How have things been there for you?
In Boston, we're especially doing the distancing thing here in Boston. Here with the kids, we've been homeschooling, and while there have been plenty of protests, demonstrations across the country, we've been doing all right. Actually, this Sunday, I'm actually organizing with a few other organizations a prayer gathering. On Sunday in Boston Common, right in the middle of the Common. Hopefully the weather holds off for us from 2:30 to 3:30. Last week I had the feeling that, you know what, we need to gather together to encourage each other. I've been feeling the weight of this. Many people I've talked to have felt the weight of this. There's a sense of disillusionment, discouragement, but there's also this kind of anticipatory feeling that we are part of something. How do we best serve? And so I gathered with some other leaders and organizations, and we're calling it Boston Pray. And we're inviting people to come out for a time of encouragement, a time of scripture reading, a time of prayer, a time of song and worship, and really looking forward to having people come out and just really, in search of unity, but also justice. Justice and unity, I believe, go hand in hand. We can't have one without the other. We have to be unified in our call for justice, and that takes everybody. So thanks for asking. Sunday in Boston Common, 2:30 to 3:30.
We'll be right back with more Weekly Pulse.
Okay, you know about cycling and the Tour de France and the athletes who have made outdoor cycling mainstream, but this week we're learning about track cycling. Olympic cyclist Dotsie Bausch has had an incredible career in track cycling. Not only did she medal in the 2012 Games, but she's also an 8-time USA national champion. So we asked her to explain what makes track cycling so exciting and why you might see royalty in the stands at her next Olympic event.
Speed and exhilaration and insanity all wrapped up in one. Track cycling takes place on a velodrome, so 250 meters with a 44-degree banking. So if you go to the top of the end of the velodrome, you look down, you're looking down like 4 stories. So it's quite steep. It is with bikes that have a fixed gear, then you don't have any brakes. When people panic, they throw on their brakes. And then the domino effect of crashing. It's pretty comparable to track and field. You have your sprinters and you have your endurance. I raced in an event called Team Pursuit, 3 kilometers, so 12 laps around a 250-meter track. In an event that's pretty short, ours is about 3 minutes, you really can't make a misstep. We beat the Australians to go into the gold medal final by 8/100ths of a second in the Olympic. There's those rivalries too, like there is in every sport, right? Between certain countries and certain teams. Australia and Great Britain can't stand each other. So when we beat Australia in London to take us into the gold medal match, it was a standing ovation of every seat was filled. The Prince and Princess were there. Paul McCartney was there. It was the craziest thing, but they were so excited that the Americans beat the Aussies. In 10, 20, 30 years, I don't know that there'll be, room for bikes on the road unless we make a massive shift and everybody, really starts to look at planetary responsibility, and then we all ride bikes and no one drives cars, and then then it'll all make a beautiful shift again and we'll have plenty of races.
That's it from us at Weekly Pulse, your heartbeat to what's trending in sports.
Hey sports fans, if you want to see more videos like this, check out some of our other ones right here. And if you like what you see, hit the subscribe button and stick around for more from USA Today Sports.